Hey, I'm Joe with RevZilla, and welcome to our series about how to remove the wheels from different types of motorcycles. Today we're going to go with cruisers. So there's a few different reasons you may need to remove the wheels from your bike. You could need to replace the sprockets or pulleys, the brake rotors, the wheel bearings, but more commonly the tires. Most motorcycle shops will charge you less if you just bring them the wheels to have the tires mounted to balance versus the entire bike. And also cycle gear stores will give you a discounted rate if you had bought the tires at Cycle Gear or RevZilla or any other partners, but they don't have a way to remove the wheels from a bike, so you just need to bring them the wheels to have the job done. This is going to serve as a general guide for you, but it will end up saving you a few bucks at the end of the day. Always refer to your service manual as far as any reason to work on your motorcycle, specifically removing the wheels. They'll go over any kind of specific tools you might need in addition, but generally you'll need a set of large diameter sockets or wrenches, a torque wrench, maybe some axle grease and some rags, and most importantly, a way to lift the bike. So there's a few different ways to lift different types of motorcycles. The two options we have here are pretty common for cruisers. So the jack on the right is great if you're going to just pull one wheel off the bike at a time. But the hydraulic lift we have here is a great option if you're going to pull both wheels off at the same time. This one in particular came from Harbor Freight, and it's relatively inexpensive. You can find ones like this at most hardware stores too. I really like that they have provisions for tie downs so you can secure the bike to it when it's in the air without wheels on it. So the first thing we need to do is find a safe, level place to start working. I like to loosen the axle nuts while the bike is still on the ground, because you may need to put some extra force into it and you don't want it wobbling around on the lift. Then you'll position the lift under the bike. Just be sure it's centered side to side and front to back to keep it balanced. Also be sure the area that you're jacking against is nice and smooth and flat as well. And then I like to make sure that I lift the bike only to the minimum height required to do the job. There's no need to lift the bike as high as it'll go. Once you get it to the position needed, then you can put the tie downs on the bike to secure it. I like to consider soft straps to protect the finish of the bike so that the tie downs don't scratch it. Okay, so now that we have the bike safely up on the lift, it's time to start talking about removing the axles. On this bike in particular, I'm going to have to first remove the front brake caliper and then loosen the pinch bolt on this side to get the front wheel out. And on the rear, obviously, we have the drive belt to contend with. One quick tip though regarding disc brakes is that if you push the caliper into the rotor a bit, you'll generally create some space between the pads and the rotor, which will help you put the caliper back on later on. Now that we're ready to pull the axles out of the wheels, what I generally like to do is back the axle nut off to the last few threads on the axle and then hit the nut itself with a mallet, and that'll start driving the axle out through the other side of the wheel. What that does is protects the threads so that later on when you go to put the nut back on, it won't fight you at all. It'll go on nice and smooth. So my final bit of advice as far as removal of the axles is that you got to keep track of all the parts. There's going to be wheel spacers, there's going to be washers, there's going to be a lot of pieces that become free once you pull that axle out. So what I generally like to do is, as each component comes off, I put it on the ground in the order that it is on the motorcycle. And I do recommend taking a photo because chances are you're probably going to walk by the bike later on and kick one of the wheel spacers under your workbench, and then you're going to lose your mind trying to figure out why the bike isn't going back together. But you can always refer to your service manual for that information later on. Just a couple more things to consider when it does come time to remove the wheels off the bike is that cruiser wheels are pretty heavy, so you want to be sure that the bike is secured to the lift so that when you do remove the wheel from the bike that it doesn't become off balance and tip away from you. Another thing to consider is that if you have a touring bike that has a really long rear fender or a cruiser that has a long fender, you'll need to raise the bike up pretty high to be able to slip the rear wheel out from under that fender, so just be mindful of that. We got pretty lucky because our Sporty has a really short rear fender, so we didn't need to raise it up very high to get the wheel out. So once you have your new sprocket or rotor or wheel bearings or tires installed on your wheels, be sure your axle and threads are very clean and re-greased so that they're easy to remove at a later date. Then go ahead and put the wheels back in your bike in the reverse order that you took them out. I do recommend snugging up the axle nuts by hand while it's on the lift and then torquing them to the factory owner's manual spec once it's back on the ground. A couple other things to consider is that if you did push the calipers into the rotors, like I mentioned earlier, to give them some more room to get back on, be sure to pump the brake pedal and brake lever back up before you go out on the road. Other things to consider is your chain or belt tension. Once you had the rear axle out and put everything back together, especially if you had changed your chain, it's a good time to double check your chain tension or belt tension. Another thing to note is that new tires are generally pretty slippery. I like to take it easy on a new set of tires for at least the first tank of fuel before they're completely scrubbed in. So now you should be able to remove the wheels from your cruiser on your own. And check out our other videos where we cover how to remove the wheels from adventure bikes, dirt bikes, and sport bikes. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to one of our gear geeks at 877-792-9455 or shoot an email to cs@revzilla.com. Thanks for watching our video today about how to remove wheels from a cruiser motorcycle. I'm Joe, and I'll see you next time.